Hello, and you are listening to episode 32 of The Great Game. In this episode, we got to chat with Dave from Sydney Megagamers about Infinite Horizons, which is a design by Zane, who has been on the podcast several times before. It was a good chat to dissect a very dense and busy mega game, as you'll hear, which we ran twice in Sydney earlier this year. Before we jump in, though, Jack, there's a bit happening in the mega game scene in Brisbane these days. What's got you guys busy?
Absolutely. So we're preparing to run God Emperor on the 25th of August, which will be really exciting to get back into the swing of things because it's been a long time after COVID since we've run something. Unfortunately, tickets have already sold out, but we do really recommend that you jump in the Discord or join our mailing list. We'll include links to that in the description. If you are keen if you're in the Brisbane area and you want to get involved in mega games in future, we are planning some other designs that we will be running in the future soon. So yeah, please jump in if you're keen to join in with those.
Yeah, awesome. It's very good to see mega games starting back up there, and also seems like a very enthusiastic crowd. Sold out very quickly, so that is good.
Absolutely. I think people have been waiting for it.
Yes, I think so. And then obviously, when we're publishing this, it's about a month out from First Contact down in Melbourne. I believe that is sold out now. So good luck to them and everyone who is going along. Hopefully, we will get some good stories out of that one. And yeah, it's been a busy first half of the year. So we did have a little break in getting the podcast out. We've got plenty of episodes lined up, however, and we should be back to our normal scheduling now. But I think that is it. Hopefully you enjoy this conversation about Infinite Horizons.
So we're here with Dave from Sydney Megagamers. Thank you so much for joining us, Dave.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
So why don't we just kick off the discussion just with a short introduction of you? Why don't you, how did you get into Mega Games, and what's been your history with the group?
I was looking at that today, actually. So Sydney, because Pat asked, what games do you want to go back to? And he didn't list any of the games that I started with that Pat made. So I did start with Sydney Megagamers, I think 8 or 9 years ago. The first game I went to was one of Pat's, Brave New World, which was a pretty kind of classic mid-2000s mega game, I think. That was my first exposure to mega games. I got a ticket essentially for free. I think one of the lads from that regular crew back then cancelled and said, do you want to come along to this? And I just said yes. I didn't do any preparation really at all. They linked me the sit down and shut up video, which I didn't watch and I still haven't watched. That's I think my secret. I have never seen that video.
Claim to fame.
Yep. And yeah, I went to a couple more in Sydney, and then I moved to America for a couple of years, and then the COVID happened and I came back. And post-COVID, I think years ago, I told Pat I'd get more heavily involved with mega games, and then I came back and ran into Pat bushwalking randomly.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you remember this, Pat.
Yeah, I do. And I haven't gotten rid of you since.
No,
where were you bushwalking?
Western Sydney.
Yeah, Western Sydney. Yeah. I remember I was going up rock stairs and like head down because it was walking upstairs, and then I heard a voice and I was like, I know that voice, and took 3 more steps, and I was like, that's Pat, and turned around and I was like, you're Pat, right? Like I don't think we'd spoken in years, like 5 years at that point. And then he was like, yes, strange man in the bush talking to me. And then yeah, I was heavily involved with Sydney Mega Games since.
Wow, it's fate.
So it was 2016 was Brave New World. So yep. I think, yeah, it must have been a big drop off after that because you missed the games. Well, some of the games that followed when you went overseas. And I think I've asked you before, but you didn't go and explore any Mega Games when you were in America, did you?
No, which was my own fault. I was quite busy with. I was there for work for the 2
Mm.
years, and I was busy with that. But it just kind of slipped my mind to really search to see if anyone was running anything locally. And I think I was in Texas, and I think Jack they ran God Emperor,
Oh, they ran
right?
God Emperor. Heavy Rain. They
Heavy
renamed it
Rain,
to. That's
yeah.
That's
crazy.
right.
Oh.
And I think I was there during that. Maybe I'm not sure. I just know that they did run that. Yeah, I think I got a really deep dive Mega Games because I flew down to Pulp, which I know that has been brought up before
Yeah.
down in Geelong.
The
For their first
origins
watch list
of
guys. Yeah, the origins of
Melbourne.
Melbourne Mega Games.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
As England, and that kind of kickstarted my I like dressing up for Mega Games habit.
That's right.
Dressed up the table.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
With a picture of the Queen.
yes.
Yeah.
And a teapot.
So since you've come back to Australia and then you've gotten heavily involved with Sydney Megagamers, and then when we came out this side of COVID, I think I pressured you into running a game this year.
Yep.
And I think the game was even my idea, even though I hadn't
Yep.
fully digested what it was. But Infinite Horizons, you've just run it twice. How do you describe this game? What's it about?
There's I'd go the two ways. I think for the people, your regular listeners, it's a pretty classic, like 4 games and a council. 4 tables and a council Mega game. With your regular, 9 teams of 5 players and a council that's separate from those teams. As it's a pretty classic sci-fi story as well. I think it's designed by Zane in the UK, and he did an excellent job with the mechanical and the interaction design. One of the reasons that we really stuck it out is that I kind of had a belief that the game was really, really good. There's a small target audience in Sydney Megagamers that love these big crunchy mega games, the classic ones. And looking behind the scenes, a lot of games that were being designed weren't that. So I liked the idea of it being a science fiction classic mega game with some more modern takes on it. So it wasn't just another Watch the Skies kind of clone, which I know there's a couple of, but it's a more modern take on that. The setting itself is very. I'd use just the Avatar, the movie, as the main reference. I don't know if that was Zane's inspiration for the game, but it's kind of the vibe that I got from it, from a high level. That your Earth itself is struggling. There's been a Cold War. Things aren't very great. The huge population boom. They're set in the near future, and then we discover this paradise planet full of resources and riches and food and water, and we know how to get there. And Earth gets together and builds an ark and goes there and colonizes it. And that colony is it starts from that day one from landing and being a dystopian future. All the corporations that paid their way onto the ship are kind of the ones running it, and a small group of national teams, these big national mega nations that helped, quote unquote, to get the ark there, the ship there.
It kind of feels it's kind of the reverse, I feel, of a lot of these geopolitical games where most of the teams are the nations, and then there's like a small contingent of corporations on the side doing shady stuff. In this game, it's mostly the corporations, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's 6 and 3, 6 corporations and 3 national teams, which does a good job as well. The national teams are your usual conglomerates, like your North America conglomerate and your Asian conglomerate, mainly China. So you have Space America and Space China. And then there's the League, which is a nice change of pace. It's kind of the Middle East and Africa in their a new renaissance, a new golden era of science. And then Europe is, I guess Europe is wrapped up in, it's a NATO conglomeration, but.
And then the corporations are all very almost cartoony.
Oh yeah, they're all Zane took some very very good legally distinct corporations from a lot of your favorite 80s science fiction movies. Waitani's a good one.
Nice.
Before I'm going to sort of run through the parts of the game, but before going into that, those two sides of the coin, the corporations and the nations, what's the key thing that's sort of different between the two?
I might struggle to put this into good words. One of the reasons why I liked this game when I was going through it, and Zane, I had a few chats with him about it, and he kind of had some very specific differences that he want. But I saw an opportunity. So some of the changes that I made, almost nothing mechanical, because I think mechanically it was really good, but flavorfully, there's actually very little differences mechanically between the teams. It's more opportunities that they have everywhere except for at the council. So the council game is where I got some excitement from as well, because I don't know if I'd seen it before, that only 3 teams can vote, and that's the 3 national teams. But they're heavily outweighed by the 6 non-national teams. So the only way they can really get support after they vote a law in is to make sure that they've got support from some of the corporation teams. So within the council, as it's written, I kind of like the cleverness of the national teams have a role that's an assembly member, and the assembly is the council here. And then the corporations have a matching role that's just a lobbyist. So the teams are all the same size, but the difference between them there, I thought was really neat. That if the corporations want these big laws changed or want laws to occur, they can't do it directly themselves. They have to lobby, either under the table or legitimately lobby the national teams to get those laws passed. But then there's a council team separate from everyone else, and they're the only ones that can introduce laws. So you've got this big blend of these 3 different groups and 3 different players, all wanting different things, and they all have to find a common ground to get anything passed. And I know I've explained that poorly because it sounds complicated to me already, but I hope there's an image there of just like, most of the game is very, very similar, but then when you've got these little differences, and these little differences occur throughout the game, and the player experiences can be so varied. And we did see that through the 2 runs. The 2 runs were very, very different. I don't know if that answers at all what you asked.
No, it does. And I think like that is a unique thing that I wanted to pull out, the lobbyists versus the voting members. It didn't play out. So I helped to run both these games, but as a side role. So I've got a lot of insider knowledge just for the listeners. But it didn't play out as differently as it looks on paper. It did. It didn't play out how I expected it to, I suppose.
No.
The lobbyists versus the voting members. But you can get into that. But I just thought it was quite an interesting design choice for the political game, that if you're going to have corporations, then they shouldn't probably be sitting on some kind of council voting on stuff. They should be influencing, yeah.
That's actually, the council is one thing that I think I've failed to mention so far, is that it's the classic 9 teams of 5, but then there's a council separate from all of that, and the council is a team of 6, and they are, plot-wise, they've been given those roles by the UN, and the UN's kind of this, they're not on the planet. Oh, the planet's called Niwa. By the way, I don't think I've mentioned that. The planet that you're on is Niwa, and there's the NCC is the Niwan Colony Council, and they're not a member of any of the other nations or teams. The nations and the corporations, they have very, corporations want to get rich. The nations want to make sure that they don't collapse back on Earth. But the council just wants to make sure that the colony itself survives. They have a very tough day of doing that, because the way that they do that tends to be through taxation, and none of the teams like paying for that,
Mm.
which came up multiple times. But that's kind of part of the fun, that tension between everyone there. But yeah, the NCC, that council team, they're the only ones that can introduce laws to be voted on. So they
Cool.
don't have a vote themselves, but if you're a corporation, you've got to go to the council, get them to write, or you write up a law and go to the council and say, we want you to pass this. And if you pass this, we'll go and we'll look after the new stadium that you're trying to build if you get this law passed.
I guess it harkens
Nice.
back kind of to like Watch the Skies style games where the UN had rotating members going in and out, and so if you weren't a member that turn, you needed someone to represent you. But it sort of takes it to a different level, which I like.
Yeah. I liked the design of that through both games. I don't think it ever played out the way that I envisaged. Sorry. But I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there's some cleanup that we could do in that space. But I really like the idea of that as well. I think that was Zane's. I chatted to him a few times. I was like, this is really clever. I really like the idea of that as a political game. Because a lot of councils in mega games, they go off into a room, they're given problems, and then they show up again, and they're like, those problems are fixed, and no one else really knew what was happening. And I think this tried to reconnect the council game back into the main room. Whether or not it did that, I think it did it better than a lot of other games I've played. That's to be sure.
Yep.
So, how did it play out differently to your expectations? What was it that didn't really work the way you thought it would in practice?
I think a lot of it was player expectations going into it, which is something that I spent a lot of time on during production, and I obviously didn't do a great job of it, but I tried to get all of the proposed laws from corporations that didn't get through from game one. I haven't had a chance yet. Game 2 was only 2 days ago. I haven't really had a chance to sit down and decompress from that. But from game 1, some of the laws were not as fleshed out as maybe they could be, or as fleshed out isn't. A lot of the laws weren't really along the lines of what other corporations, especially the national teams, might want. I think one of them was the bank, and in the game there's a bank team. The bank pays all tax, and that was it. That was the law. I was like, that I don't. This isn't going to get passed, and it didn't. Obviously, like it's just. And there was, I think, I'm not sure how I can approach that better in the future, but maybe you can give more examples of what laws could look like, and how to approach to get it through. And a lot of people were writing laws in isolation. So there's 9 different teams, but one team would write a law and then give it to the council, and it wouldn't go through. And then they would be like, "Well, what's the point?" I think I had to strongly encourage them. You can't do it alone. You've got to find a group of other people, find common ground, and then push that through. And in both games, I think they figured that out by the second half, but the first half may have been frustrating.
That's fair. So before we talk about the other sections of the game, one thing that interested me from reading the rulebook is the turn structure is pretty interesting, I think, which is you have a classic, like, half on, half off structure where you spend 20 minutes doing things and doing actions at a table, and then 10 minutes going back to your team table and then just talking with your team. But then every 4th turn, you have a storm season for 15 minutes where like no one can do anything. It's all storming, and it's like a time for factions to negotiate and things like that. How does that work? It sounds really cool.
There's the angle of it. When I first read that, I was like, oh, there must be like a big plot thing that Zane has planned. And what is this? And it's not. It's just the game is so big. It's the largest, mechanically speaking. I literally have a trolley with 2 big boxes, like fruit boxes from Costco, of components, and then there's the map tube, like hundreds and hundreds of cards.
Wow.
It's the largest mechanically game I've ever been involved with, for sure. But that 15-minute window is literally a time for facilitators to catch up and have a break. So, and it worked very well, and for players as well. So mechanically, nothing happens on any of your boards or any of your tables during that 15-minute window. One thing that players are super short on in the game is time. They don't have enough time to do everything. And then this 15-minute window where no one has to rush off to a table and no one has to run back and forth between team members to get more metal cubes or exotic goods or whatever you might want, to run over to another table and trade it with someone and then put it in another box and ship it off back to Earth, right? It's just 15 minutes to kind of decompress and catch up and see what's going on and what people on your team are doing, and then find out any other component that you might need to find out that you've fallen behind on. And then facilitators, you can clean up the tables and move things around because it gets so messy and there's so many things to do on that 10-minute window during that second phase, like you said.
That's my answer. I will be bold and say Zane is a sicko and designed the most admin-heavy game I've ever seen, and that the Storm is a season to do admin.
Yeah.
Like it was
Sorry,
like
Zane, if you're listening.
I think
yeah,
absolutely
I don't
right.
think
It's interesting. It makes it does sound like a cool idea, because I've noticed when we have a lunch break in our games, often people do return from lunch really energized, in my experience, because they've had that time when there's no components, there's nothing, it's just talking and figuring out what's actually been happening in the game and talking to other people. So having like regular little mini extra breaks there is kind of, I don't know, it does seem interesting.
Yeah. I think it worked really well as well, because the turns are quite short, I think, for a mega game. 30-minute turns with 20-minute action phases. For a game of this scale, the number of components and moving parts, 20 minutes is not enough time to do everything that you want to do.
Right.
Which I learned after the first game to make sure to tell everyone that. I think twice in my opening spiel. I repeated it at the beginning. I said it at the very beginning and at the end. You're not going to have enough time. Like you're going to want to do things, and you're not going to be able to do everything. So choose a few things and do the most chaotic thing, right? Like cause the most chaos. That's the best way of playing a mega game. But don't do nothing.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that 15-minute window is a good catch-up time. I think you lose. At first I was like, why don't we just make every turn 5 minutes longer, right? Like, why can't we just take that time and give everyone more option to do things on the map? And I think going forward, a lot of games I'm looking at, I'm like, I'm going to remove 5 minutes from everyone's time and then throw this third turn in. As just walk around the room and talk to people.
And just for context of that, calling the game quite large, I think it's got at least 25 different resources. So like cubes that are special, like actual currency resources, but also cards that let you do things and cards that turn into other cards. Like it's probably higher than that. It's probably like 28 or 29, but it's component rich. There's a lot of things moving around physically in the space.
Yeah.
Even before you worry about the rules.
Oh yeah. I think one of the first pages in the rule book is actually pages plural is components in the game. Here is all of the bits, and that really is just things that you can pick up and trade. Someone might want this thing, so that's not just like money, which is there is money in the game. Credits. Yeah, there's 3 different types of metal, and then 5 different types of exotic currency, and then there's production rights on the map itself of Niwa, and then there's also a colony is a second, I guess I'd call it a map. So there's 2 maps, and then the colony has buildings for the colony itself, so your factories and your refineries and your habitats, And then in the wilds on the greater map, there's mines and roads and oil rigs and outposts, and there's so many different things in the game. It was so daunting when we picked it up. I think I probably went to Pat a few times and I was like, I can't believe you've done this to me. Like, well, what's going on? This is crazy. But it was enjoyable, and I think I knew after I got a good handle of the rulebook and the game as a whole, I was like, there's a good opportunity here for Sydney Megagames to run kind of what I wanted to offer to people. This big, huge, crunchy mega game as close as you can get to a board game without it really being a board game, and then stripping away everything that makes a board game, right? Because I think one of my key differences between mega games and board games is that at the end of a board game, you sit there and you're like, oh, next time I'm going to do this better, or if I get this option, I'm going to do this. And with the mega game, you're never really going to play a mega game again. So you've got to strip that back and say, no, everything has to be here. This is the game that you're going to run, and it has to be really quick to learn. And then you go, well, there's so many things in this game to learn. I think Zane did an excellent job. I went through a lot of it to try to strip out some bits, and you can't. There's nothing in there really to get rid of. It's pretty well balanced and put together. And so I just focused on the production and reproduction of the game components. You talk about it. I think Zane gave us a complete game just in a lot of different pieces, by his own admission.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few different. Let's go through the different kind of. You mentioned it's a council and 4 tables. Let's talk about some of those 4 different tables. I guess just maybe in brief.
Sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned the colony map and the Niwa map. How do those 2 work in basic at a basic level?
At a basic level, the Niwa map is more or less the map that you're used to in a mega game. Units moving around, trying to control hexes, and those hexes generate resources if you control them. A few odd rules here and there, like the national teams can make national claims in the rules as written on a hex, and a corporation might already have mines there, and then there's some tension around what that means. But it's very similar to, I think, what you're used to for a mega game. The colony itself is less of a map. It does have a map in the middle, and for this game, I went to one of our other Sydney Mega Game regulars, James, and used his 3D printer, and we printed out a bunch of literal colony pieces, like little buildings and headquarters and stuff. The map in the middle is really just there so you can see as the game goes on, you can see it expanding. It has no real mechanical impact. You just get to see the colony itself grow, which is a really cool feeling, I think, for a lot of players, where at the beginning of the game, it's just this little quite large building, but little building in the middle, and then the headquarters around it and a few habitats. And then halfway through the day, you might walk up to it again, and you just see that, there's factories and these things are growing and expanding. And waste cubes. There's always waste cubes everywhere. But that's that's where that player at the colony they'll be building their main production facilities. Like your factories and your advanced components. As a team, your sponsors, either your corporate sponsors or national sponsors back on Earth, are constantly requesting things from you, and you've got to generate those. And most resources is generated in one of those 2 locations, which leads neatly to the trade.
Yeah, how does that work with I believe it's the trade representative who focuses on that?
Yeah, so they get given a cardboard box every turn, and in that cardboard box is a request from their sponsors back on Earth that says, they want food, or they want fuel, or they want special, like, rare Earth elements, and they've got to try and meet those requests. But at the same time, other corporations, non-player corporations back on Earth, they're constantly saying, well, we want a piece of that pie as well. So the game deals out these contracts that they can bid for, the trade representatives can bid for, and try, if they win that, they've got to try and fulfill those trade requests. It might be for more food or more fuel. And maybe if your team is really good at generating fuel, you see the fuel one there and you put a bid for it. And there's a lot of back and forth there. And if you want something in the game that can't be generated on Niwa, you can request it from your sponsor. And then this is where there is a tracker at the trade table that has how well your sponsor is doing back on Earth. And if they're doing really well, they might give you a lot. And if they're not doing very well, they'll give you next to nothing. Pat probably knows more about trade than I do because I put him there. It's probably the crunchiest, most intense part of the day because you've got 10 minutes to go through these 9 boxes where they're all requesting different things and then they're all winning and losing things and people are walking up. There's a trade table there, a literal, I can sell food for $4 and buy food for $2. And on game 1, we were really careful to get that in the right order. And I think, Pat, you said you got it the wrong way around in game 2, and then we had to fix it.
Well, I mean, I did it once by accident, and then I did it a few other times deliberately because I realized
it's funny.
The kind of players playing the trade game are the ones who are looking for that. So we got a lot of market manipulation through that because people realized I can come and buy for cheap and then sell for higher. And then, the admin that I was talking about, the prices of things would change as that happens. The admin of the trade table was so bizarre that when I was there for the second game, we had 3 people attached to it. And we each had our sort of jurisdictions. And Kirsty, who was doing another part of that trade table, I don't know what she did all day. I don't know anything about her part of the table because I was just doing my one part and it was like a full-time gig.
Yeah.
Very crazy part of the game. But I can see how it would be fun interacting with that as a player because it's like a stock market / you're getting quests from Earth and you're competing with other people for other quests, these contracts that you bid on. Like there's all this stuff happening there that's really interesting, but it's very admin heavy.
Yeah, it's a really good opportunity for stories as well. When I was writing it, I was like, this is so prime for corruption. Like it's just, and that's the vibe that you want to set in this game, really.
Yeah.
This awful futuristic. And then at the pub afterwards, one of the teams was like, oh, we tricked you because when you're bidding, we realized that you always give it to, not the highest bidder, but the second highest. So we put in 50 and then I went to them and they put in 49 and then we split the profits. I was like, you didn't really trick us there. You did exactly what I was hoping would happen, right? Like that's
right.
The game rules are kind of vague and there's lots of gaps. And I love that for this game it's really rules heavy, especially the trade. But it's built as a platform. It's built to tell a story, and if you can find these weird gaps, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, and there's players who quickly realized that every turn the market would have resources, and that was one of the especially early in the game. That was one of the main sources of resources for any team, and so. Unless they wanted to wait a whole turn and hopefully get resources from Earth, people had to go to that marketplace. So there were players who realized that really early, and they would be there first, literally on the turn marker, and they would buy everything that they could, like almost to clean the market out. And then the rest of their game was probably going around selling that to the other teams at an inflated price. Which I can imagine how that would be a fun day. Like once you click that and you dominated it, yeah. So it's a very interesting part of the game.
There's also all the workers and everything good. Like every building in this game, I think that I've mentioned so far, they all require workers, the little meeple and pawns to work the buildings to do anything. And that's all through trade as well. And you put in requests to say how much next turn I want 10. There's 3 different types of workers. It's huge. And you say how many of each one that I want, how many basic workers and skilled and expert workers, because this building that I have requires, 1 expert worker, or the blueprint to build another building requires these things. And then there's a lot of opportunity for collusion there because they get given to the highest bidder. So it's in the best interest of all of the tradespeople to kind of get together and make sure that they all bid, one, like the minimum, the bare minimum. But then one team might be like, well, I really want those 4 export workers. There's only 10 of them. I want 4 of them. So I'm just going to agree to everyone. Yeah, let's all pay this for the export workers and we'll split it. And then they go up and they'll buy all 10 because the game allows for that, encourages that even. Not written, but
Yeah. And then there's the assembly,
yes.
which is not the council.
No, the the council is the council team, and the assembly is made up of the chief executive of the council, and the lobbyists and the assembly members, which we touched on before. Which I can go into more detail again if you like, but it's very much a classic kind of council game. We go there with issues and say the whole the colony's facing this issue. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, cool.
At the assembly, sorry.
Mm.
And then there's the council, which is different.
Yeah. I was confused about that in the rule book, I admit.
Yeah.
Oh, it came up a few times. I think during the rewrite of the rule book, I think I just said NCC a lot. I just said, I'm getting confused by the word council and I'm not sure which one you're talking about. So I cleaned that up and said, no, the NCC. It's always the NCC
cool.
when you're talking about the team, the NCC.
Yeah.
Nice. So speaking of changes like that, how did it go with prepping the game for your first run and adapting it for Australia? You mentioned you didn't make a lot of mechanical changes.
Not too many. A couple based off not too many mechanical changes. A couple based off feedback from Zane. He's run it previously 5 times, I think. I'm assuming in the UK. And we removed some components that were unnecessary, but everything else kind of felt pretty clean. I could see the intention behind everything, and there was no dead end components. Things that if you ignored, the game wouldn't care. So if I tried to remove anything, there'd be an impact somewhere else. Generally, when I try to write games, I try to identify those dead end resources and say, well, if everyone in the game ignores that, does the game care that didn't happen? And this game doesn't have any of that. Every single resource that was in there kind of impacted somewhere else. And then that kind of meant that all of the mechanics that were in the game probably needed to be in the game. And there's dozens of those mechanics. There's more little table sheets of any game I think I've ever seen before. A3 sheets. I think at rough count, there's probably 8 or 9 not team specific sheets, but then every team also has a handful of those A3 sheets. So you end up printing probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen A3 pieces of paper and laminating them for all of these different parts of the game. But if you removed any one of them, I don't think the game would like that very much.
It's all a fine clockwork machine. It's cool that it is so crunchy and that you wanted to run a crunchy mega game, because we talked about this a bit in our episode on rules heavy versus rules light mega games. My impression is that people seem to be leaning more in the rules light direction. I mean, in general. So it's awesome to see some kind of like a really intense crunchy mega game like this go off.
No, I think I completely agree that most people are leaning that way. I think there's a few people that remain on the crunchy side, and I don't want to leave them behind. I want to make sure that everyone has a game. But I went into this, so as very little mechanical changes, but for production, I went in with a very kind of clear goal of what I wanted the production of the game to be. So I ended up, we had an agreement with Zane that said we'll reproduce all the components and kind of clean things up in a way, and then I'll give it back to you. And I ended up going through every single component and redesigning. Everything got touched. I think every word was either updated or rewritten across all of the rule books. Every picture was changed, every card was changed, every board was changed. So everything essentially just got a facelift across the whole game. And with the design goal in mind that for that poor player that hears about a mega game and sees our Generalissimo is dead kind of role play light touch game and then thinks looks fantastic, or they went to the Generalissimo and said that was fantastic, I'm going to go to the next game Sydney Megagames runs, and then you go from that into this, and it would just be devastating. You would have no idea what's going on, and it would be insane, right? So my goal with that was to make sure that if you weren't engaging with the game mechanically, the game offered a lot in return on the production side, that you could interact with the different things in the game in fun, different ways. And from my own experiences with some games, I don't really like where I do something and then I stand there and I just have to watch kind of what happens and it plays out. And then 5 minutes later, I walk somewhere else and I do something else. And this game has the opportunity where that might happen. And I was rewriting a lot of this game while I was in Japan. I ended up using a lot of music tones from Japanese train stations for the turn timer. But I went to Disneyland there with my family, and I think it kind of clicked while I was there. Of Disneyland, honestly, you spend most of the time waiting, right? Like you're just in lines, doing nothing. But then if you look around at the lines at Tokyo Disneyland, there's always little things going on everywhere. Like when you're in line for the Haunted Mansion, if you read all of the signs around, you actually learn that there's a story to the Haunted Mansion, and then you get in this big elevator thrill ride and go up and down, and then 20 seconds later, your 90 minutes of standing in line is done. But if you engage, you can engage. If Disney can engage me standing in a line for 90 minutes by just reading and looking at things that are going on around me, it's like, can I do that with a mega game? So when I would make a board, I would put a massive contract down the side for that. Like, if you want to engage with this, here's this huge thing, and it kind of does the Willy Wonka fade to blank and goes away. And then another board might have something similar, but it will be a bit different. And then the game asks for luxury resources, and in the rule book it said like alcohol and tobacco. And I went on AliExpress and found like a bulk lot of little dollhouse alcohol, like booze bottles. So you could get a tiny little 1-inch tall Chivas or a Jack Daniels as your luxury resources, and then like little boxes of cigars. As electronic components, and in the original it was like electronic components of these discs with this symbol on it. And then I went on AliExpress and I found a 2x2 centimeter breadboard, electronic circuit board in bulk. So the electronic components in the game are literal electronic components. So I was hoping by doing all of these little things all over the place, where every little moment can kind of drag you out. I was like, oh, I'm not feeling great. But look at that thing, like the colony's growing and there's literal buildings popping up out of the table and moving out. Or you'll walk over somewhere and then this person says, I need $10. Will you take this bottle of Chivas Regal? Right? It's a literal bottle, right? And
Yeah.
I think that worked. And the approach there to kind of make sure that you could have fun even if you weren't enjoying the game itself is kind of what I was going for. And I think it worked. Because I was so terrified that we had return players from Generalissimo. We had a lot of return players from Generalissimo going into Infinite Horizons, and they are polar opposite on that spectrum of complexity. And I was like, I don't want them to have a bad time, because again, the 8-hour thing that we were talking about earlier, whereas this is 8 hours, some of these people have kids, they get 1 day a year away from their kids. I don't want to ruin that. I want them to have a day that they will remember positively in some aspect. And if Disney can make me remember the lines more than they can make me remember the rides, I was like, I can do that too, right? Do I have the capability of doing that? And as you can probably tell, I got really passionate about that, and it's really good.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like so much attention paid to every single detail. It sounds absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
It did. It was, and it did. Like everything in the game looks good, which is something we were talking about earlier. But like, it really adds to the whole experience, and not just the entertainment value, but like you're saying, Dave, the immersion. I was getting to a point later in the game where people need to be a bit more creative with how they're doing their little schemes or their wizard wheezes, that as the UK crowd would call it. And it was very evocative to be able to say, hey, you're paying someone to go and manipulate the market. Why don't you pay them with a crate of whiskey? Or some other goods that aren't just some tokens which say money on them. So it was, I think it went a long way for a seemingly small thing.
Yeah, I think the small things are the magic to that as well. I think I've told Pat multiple times that I believe in the perfect is the enemy of the good, but I don't. I think I say that more than I believe it. I think perfect is good, so I should aim for perfect because then I'll get to good, right? And then quite recently, I was watching a cooking show. And I've taken it to heart. Marco Pierre White said that perfect is a lot of little things done well. And I kind of wish I knew that before I did a lot of little things done what I think was well, because it sums it up it sums up perfectly, right? That if you just pay attention to all the little things and you add a little bit more, and someone gets that moment that they haven't engaged with the trade table at all, maybe they're at the colony table the whole day and all they've seen is their buildings going up and they've got cards in front of them, and then they get meeple from trade. They put it there and they're like, oh, I'm missing one meeple. Oh, I've got a couple bucks. I'll go over to the trade table and just buy it. And they walk over there and then they see that if they want to buy that meeple, there's this massive contract next to the board. And they're like, oh my goodness, what is this? Like, well, I don't agree to any of this. And then you can be like, it doesn't matter. It's just flavor. And throughout the day, you get, if I scatter those little moments everywhere throughout the game, if someone's getting disengaged or if they're not having it, maybe they just stand up and walk around and they just start seeing all of these things everywhere. Like, oh, this was great. So not a lot of mechanical changes, huge amount of production changes.
And how did it go? How do you think? Not just how did people find your little additions, but how do you think the game's actually ran? What's the short answer to that? Because I know that you could probably talk in depth about some of the feedback that you've got and what you saw on the day. But how do you think broadly?
I think I said that I'm devastated that it went well, because I think I was hoping that I could just put it on a shelf and walk away forever. But I think it went really well. I think all of as a platform for a game that people could find an opportunity to engage with it however they wanted to engage with it. It's there. It's immensely complex, but you can just choose to engage with that complexity in any way that you want. In that first game, we had players that all they did, Kane Enterprise is one of the teams. They just said, oh, we can deal with waste. All we're going to do is just deal with waste. And you look at their table and it's just covered in these waste cubes. But they're doing it with just massive smiles on their face. And like, we're getting so rich. I was like, okay, cool. I was not expecting one team just to do that, try to get wealthy off dealing with garbage.
I think that was the same team as well who was just moving all their waste to other people's lots. Like one of the players, Genji, who, if anyone sees the video that we produced in Sydney on the Generalissimo is Dead, that was Genji's work. He spent that whole first game just doing covert operations, I suppose, but it was to move waste from them to someone else's team, like into their factories or whatever. It was great. You got away with it all day.
Yeah.
And that's a whole mega game.
Yeah. And then in game 2, China they had too much waste, so they repackaged it as exotic health supplements or makeup or something and shipped it home. And then got away with it. They sold it to someone else as exotic makeup, and then they shipped it back to Earth, and just that's how they dealt with their waste. Okay, cool. Yeah, you can do that. It's a mega game. But no, I think it went excellent.
Yeah.
Much better than I could have hoped for, I think.
That's so good to hear. And did you make much changes leading up to game 2? Was there, it sounds like it went amazingly, but was there much stuff you wanted to tweak?
I think a few lessons learned around the map I bought was too small, and then in the first game they kind of started popping things off the map, so I made some little tables around the map for them just to store those things that they popped off the map. And that seemed to have worked well. We changed the order of a few things just to make it run a bit smoother. And we got a lot more facilitators. I think that's a huge, but nothing mechanical. Like I said, I think it's pretty clean mechanically. It's big and it's noisy, but that also lets you change the way that you want to run the game on the fly quite well. I think in the first one we wanted tension somewhere, and I took away all their food, I think, in the first one. And I could kind of just do that. And then they have to find alternative ways of getting to that food. Like you can just, there's so many levers. It's just a game of levers. But no real major changes, no. And the game's played out polar opposites of each other, which I think is nice. I've played a few games, or I've been involved with games multiple times where the ending kind of trends towards the same ending. And in this one, game 1, Earth itself, because they were unable to support it well, devolved into nuclear war. And then the colony splintered. And it didn't end well for the colony.
Yeah, I think some people were leaving the colony and the rest were kind of tearing it apart.
Yeah.
And there was no hope because Earth couldn't come help them anymore.
Yeah. Whereas in this one, I'm still confused how they did it because, as written, they're not really supposed to be able to do both, the colony and Earth. But they did both in the second game. Earth was extremely successful. It was really peaceful. There was no shortages, and Niwa itself, the colony, did really well. Kind of big, mega game ending, mind-controlled aliens attacking and civilians with guns in a stadium fighting back. The normal things. But I would say in the long run, like, if you were to play that out, the colony would have survived, and Earth would have been totally fine. So,
wow.
Yeah, with no changes whatsoever, the plot went in just wildly different directions. So,
which is, I think, a hallmark of a good mega game. If the players can steer it in totally contrasting directions, the way that they did with Infinite Horizons, I think it's a good. It sort of fits the mold.
Completely agree.
Harder question for you then. So you've been playing the games for a while, and we haven't really talked about it, but I know that you've done a little bit of design work in the background, even if it hasn't come to fruition, to run a game. But this was the first time leading the running of a game, not just the production of it, but then on the day. How is that for you, and what did you learn from that?
The show running. It was funny because I didn't know what was going to happen to me leading up to it, and I was so busy during production, and I gave myself plenty of time. I finished a few weeks early and then kind of scrambled at the end for a few bits and pieces, but there was no big rush. And then the night before, when I went to sleep, I think I slept fine. And then on the day of, I was nervous. I was like, I wonder how this is going to play out. And I remember your quote from this podcast, Pat, where you said for your very first game that you kind of handed out notes and said, the game starts now. And people started doing stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. It was just people got up and moved around the room. And I was standing there and I was like, is it working? Like, are they doing stuff? Like, is it on? Right. And then I had that happened. And then 8 hours later, I was at the pub and I have no real memory of what happened in the middle. It's just a massive blur. I did 15,000 steps in that small room that day, and I don't remember any of them.
Yeah.
But I do remember that at that beginning, everyone got up and rushed around and started talking to each other, and different people on different teams just started talking. I was like, okay, it's getting there. Like that.
Someone's got to coin a phrase for that feeling, because the kicker to that as well is that you don't understand what they're doing.
No.
Yeah,
That's
very
doing
true.
stuff, and you're like, I don't even know what they're doing, and I'm meant to be in charge.
Yeah. Not at
And what
all.
have I created? What have I set in motion?
Yeah.
Like at the very end with the alien mind control, one of the facilitator at the table said, "Oh, the aliens are coming in, but they're under control of Waitani." Like, I said, "What do you mean?" It's like they're mind controlling them. It's like they can't just mind control them. I said, "No, they set it up from turn one, and they spent every turn trying to mind control these aliens." Like, how did I not know about this? Like, is it? But I think it's just so common, and that's got to be, I think, for anyone that runs those games. And now hearing you say it and then having the exact same experience. And I don't know, Jack, if it was the same for you, but I think that's it. People just do stuff. And then
Yeah, definitely. No, I
you kind
definitely
of,
have that feeling.
and then you don't remember.
So from that blur of 8 hours and then the pub, did you learn anything? Is there anything that you want to try and do next time you're put in those boots and you're running the whole game?
Never on the day. That's probably my main goal. If I ever have to think of something that I haven't thought of other than like plot stuff on the day,
Yep.
I've probably made a mistake somewhere, and this game didn't let me do that. I knew going into it that I can't just be surprised by something mechanically. And I think it's probably a Pat quote again of it came up a few times where people said some things mechanically, said, "How does this work?" And I just made something up. Like you just on the spot, just do this. Like it doesn't really matter because I can fix it somewhere else in the game if you just do this right now, so that the player can just do whatever they want to do. Which I feel like maybe against what Zane was originally going for, where he kind of wanted a more strict game. But Infinite Horizons, I think you can go either way. Be really strict with it, or just make up a few rulings as you go and then fix it in another circle of the game. If everyone's too friendly, you can make them fight in other ways. But if they want to get along for now, let them get along.
Nice. And is there anything you'd take away from this experience for your own designs in future?
One component in the game is what I want for the future. So I want to go from 25 different components that people can trade to just money. This is all you get. You've got to do everything with money. I think simpler is my future goal. This game exists now, is my advice for anyone that wants to make a giant board game. Not board game, sorry, giant mega game. Infinite Horizons exists. Just play that.
That is probably good advice. And so if they take that advice and they pick up this game, which I did ask Zane, and it is not, Infinite Horizons is not officially sitting somewhere to be purchased right now. However, he's more than happy to share it. So we'll put some details in the notes about how to reach him if you would like to get your hands on it. But if people do pick up the game and want to run it, what's your number one tip for actually running Infinite Horizons?
Probably be prepared for the scale of it. Don't go in thinking that you can grab it and run it, a few weeks later. I think we grabbed it, or we started conversations with Zane, 8 months ago, and I kind of started probably working on it maybe 6 or 7 months ago. Whoever gets it next, again, the agreement, I'm not sure, but it'll all go back to Zane, and you'll get the reproduced stuff. But just give yourself time, and I think that's true for any mega game. Don't set a date for it, which we did, and I think that's super important. Where there's just a deadline, so don't say, "Oh, we'll run it at some point," but don't make that point 2 months in the future. Make that point 6 months in the future. Which is very vague advice.
Oh, it's good. I think it is good. It doesn't matter how well packaged the game is. I think you got to prepare to digest it and understand it. You got to teach it to other people. There is a lot to do, even if you don't have to do any design work.
Actually, that's probably the true advice. In the guide, it has the number of facilitators recommended. Go on the maximum end of that. We did it minimum on that game one, and maximum on game 2, and it was a much better experience game 2 for us, for facilitators.
Right.
Like Pat said, it's crunchy and paperwork and administratory.
Awesome. And what are you interested in working on next? What's the next step?
I have a few things I'd like to work on. A few prompts got put to the side as a result of me working through Infinite Horizons. In 5 days, I'm flying to Adelaide to play Justin's game.
Nice.
And then a few months after that, and then a few months after that, going down to Melbourne for the 200 player game to help run down there. And in between, I think right now I'm I'm decompressing on the creative process, but I'm trying to keep the role going for other games. And I'll probably pick up a few things that I have. Hopefully within the next 12 months, I've got a game that I've put together myself that I can try to run.
Yeah, nice.
And I'll get you another episode.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I think that about wraps us up. We could probably talk about Infinite Horizons for a long time, but is there anywhere that you want to point people, or can they contact you in any way if they want to hear more about what you're working on or Infinite Horizons?
I'm on all the usual Discords, and I'm not on any of the other social medias. And Discord, so Sydney Megagamers Discord, and Adelaide and Brisbane and Melbourne. I think I'm on all of them. I'm terminally online. So you can find me there as Dave in Sydney Megagamers, or Dave with probably Sydney, my name on the others. And just you can message me on any of those, or send me a private message. That's fine. I'll probably respond within minutes because that's all I do.
Yeah. Awesome.
Nice. Awesome.
All
Thanks
right.
so much, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll definitely summon you again for whatever comes next.
Cool. I'll look forward to it.